Part 20. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Sure. Author, Mei Guicheng. Chapter 192. I'll take you back. Well, I run very fast. Eric hugged her and ran out of the bar directly into the night, surprisingly fast. His companion chased him for a few steps before he couldn't catch up. He could only watch the person run away and pray that nothing would happen to Sierra. Being held in her arms, Sierra soon discovered that the way home was not to the manor at all. She was carried by Eric and rushed up the mountain. Before anyone could react, her body rose into the air and landed firmly on the wolf's back. The sound of his clothes tearing apart due to the deformation still echoed in her ears. There were wild deer from far away who heard the noise here and fled quickly in the jungle. Sierra leaned over him, clutching the thick fur, and was led all the way into the tribe. Gale could smell their scent from a distance and was guarding the door. However, Eric walked straight past him, transformed back into his human form, held Sierra tightly in his hands, took her into his cabin, and closed the door with his heel. Close it hard. Jem, who had returned a long time ago, stopped Gale and said, "You know we will be hopeless if we fall in love, so don't worry about him tonight." Gale, who was tall and strong, stopped and finally said helplessly, "Sierra betrayed us, and he actually wants to brand her. Aren't you afraid that he will really do this?" Jem patted him on the shoulder. "You know if he really wants to do it, none of us can stop him. This stupid guy, alas, I have to go down the mountain to accompany Greenie. Just watch them." There is no electricity on the mountain, and the bedroom without candles is dark and nothing can be seen. Sierra was put firmly on the bed by Eric, who was walking wobblingly. Her eyes were out of focus and she couldn't see anything. She could only hear him rummaging around in the bedroom to find something. "Eric? What are you looking for?" "It'll be fine soon, it should be here," he said hurriedly, and with a wave of his hand, something hit the ground with a bang and broke. He was in a very bad mood. Sierra tentatively moved off the bed. She also knew a little about the layout of Eric's bedroom. There should be a small table in front of it. She walked to the side, trying to avoid it, but kicked a stool. Hiss. She hummed softly, her waist tightened, and she was immediately lifted up with one hand. "Don't run around." Eric carried her back to the bed and sat down with one hand. He held her ankle and put it on his thigh. Then there was the sound of medicine being opened. Sierra wanted to say that it was just a small injury that could not be seen, and she also knew how seriously the drunk Eric was helping her apply medicine. He even tied gauze on her for several wounds that were less than a finger wide. Sierra stretched out her hand toward the darkness, and soon her slender fingers touched a face. Eric leaned forward and lowered his head, took the initiative to put his face into her palm, and rubbed it again and again like a big wolf dog. "I am here." "Why do you go to the bar to fight with people?" Thera rubbed his smooth face, tracing his three-dimensional brow bones and nose bridge. "I didn't. It was Jem who came to trouble me." He sat forward, feeling that this was not close enough to her, so he simply put his arms around her waist and put her on his lap. Sierra pressed against his hot body and pinched his ears. "Is it because of me?" "Well," Eric said, "why don't you deny that the whistleblower is not you?" She was silent. "I told you at the beginning, but you didn't believe me." "That was true at first, but I quickly regretted being so quick to define it." He lowered his head and pressed it against her forehead and said, "I came to you that night and talked a lot. I knew you were not asleep, but you just didn't want to answer me. You wanted to leave." "I did that," Sierra responded decisively. The bedroom became silent for an instant, except for the sound of Eric's heavy breathing. "I believe it's not you." He could accept it whether he was blinded by love or a fool, but he couldn't bear the thought of Sierra leaving him. "I did it." Sierra held his face and said seriously, "I accidentally let it slip and hurt you and your tribe." I can't hurt you anymore. So you were careless, he defended in a low voice and repeated, you were careless. She could probably guess the reason why Eric was drunk. He would not betray his race. He could not leave this big family. He was going to travel far away. Sierra pursed her lips and said softly, the matter has come to this, you must follow the tribe and leave this dangerous place. You know that I will not follow you, and your tribe will not accept me. These words angered Eric, and he suddenly pushed her down, holding both of her hands and binding them to his chest. I worked very hard, Sierra, he said against her lips. Why? Do you love that mermaid? Or the vampire? They were obviously so dirty, but they made you make a choice. She really hurt him, and his heart ached and was about to burst into pieces. I don't love them, Sierra sighed. Eric, it's just that I don't think I'm worthy of you. Are you kidding me? To push me away? Eric kissed her lips and then kissed her chin. You are a little swan, you have attracted my attention from the beginning. His hot lips moved to her neck and sucked repeatedly. The skin was pulled painfully, and Sierra thought there were strawberries all over it. I want to brand you and give you my heart, okay? The sudden decision shocked her jaw. Eric. You're still young. You don't know what true love is. Little, he chuckled muffledly, I'm an adult, Sierra, how can you be older than me? If you regard me as your only lover, you will never forget me even if you go far away, right? Sierra panicked. This was definitely not the result she wanted to see. My love will always be fixed at the time when I love you most passionately, he sighed. I seem to be crazy, I really want to do this. He was drunk now and had no idea what he meant by doing this. Sierra breathed quickly and raised her voice, how dare you try this? If you do this, I will never respond to your love. Her words were so cruel that Eric, who was leaning over her, trembled. There was silence between the two for a long time before his desperate voice came. You hate me. Sierra's heart trembled. No, you are just drunk and don't know what you are doing. As soon as the hands restraining her were loosened, Eric straightened up and looked at the girl on the bed with sad eyes. I said I would wait for you and admitted my mistake to you, but you refused to forgive me. Hey, that has nothing to do with this. Sierra knelt on the bed and touched his arm. You are too impulsive now. Let's talk about this problem when you sober up tomorrow, okay? I don't want you to do this without knowing it. We need to have a good talk. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Sure. Author, Mei Gui Cheng. Chapter 193. Eric could clearly see the anxiety on her face, but he knew what he was doing better than anyone else. He leaned over again, gently grabbed Sierra's neck and kissed her. The brutal kiss, but also the gentleness unconsciously. Her eyes gradually blurred, her hair was messy, and her breath was sweet and fragrant. Eric really wanted to drag her down and let her fall. But there will always be dawn. Morningside. Sierra woke up after sleeping in the cabin for a night. The heat source around me disappeared without knowing when, and there was only a chill on the thin quilt. She sat up, and light peeked in from the gap in the closed window. Eric. No one responded. She lifted the quilt and got out of bed, using the little light that came through to find her way to the door and open it. The birds were chirping loudly in the forest, and there were traces of bonfires on the ground ahead. She was left by Eric to sleep with her all night last night. She thought he would want to have a peaceful talk with her in the morning, but there was no sign of him. Only Jim dragged a bear out of the bushes behind, excitedly sighing about today's harvest. Jim, where's Eric? Sierra asked as she came down the steps. He turned to look at her and smiled awkwardly. Oh, I almost forgot about you. We have to live a regular life before we leave. He went to the military camp and asked me to wait for you to wake up and take you home. Sierra frowned. I thought he would talk to me. What to talk about? About how you rejected him. Jem said it very directly, and Sierra was speechless for a moment. Was he afraid that she would be too decisive, so he chose to avoid her? Did you really do this? Or are you covering up someone? Jem asked her again, with a hint of probing in his tone. Sierra pursed her lower lip. It's me, can you please take me back? The servants in the manor were anxious because she had not returned all night. Seeing that the owner came back intact, they all breathed a sigh of relief. This is an invitation to the flower show from Miss Callida. She has a vase of flowers to display. I hope you can go to the competition in a few days. The servant handed her the white card. Sierra glanced down and said, I got it. There was no emotional disturbance from anyone, nor any calculations from Lizzie's family. She stayed in the manor every day to swim around the lake and bask in the sun, and her days rarely became leisurely and peaceful. Whenever this happens, she always misses her past life. Probably everything that happened here, everything she had felt unreal to her, and she needed to keep reminding herself that this was just an immersive game. Even if she lives alone, having her own small house, a laptop, and 3 ordinary meals a day is her normal life. She is always eagerly looking forward to going home. The day of the flower show came soon. What was bad was that the changeable weather in Wally rained whenever it wanted. The only road leading to the flower show was muddy. Sierra's car had an accident halfway, and the wheels got stuck in a mud puddle. She had no choice but to get out of the car, holding an umbrella on the side of the road and waiting for the servants to push the car out. Lizzie's family's car happened to be passing by here. He asked someone to stop the car and called her from the car window, "Come up, I'll give you a ride." He seemed to have forgotten the initial tense situation between the two sides, and his face seemed a bit older than before. Sierra spoke to the servant behind and got into his car. Josie was missing in the car, only Anna was alone. She was as gorgeous as before. She looked at Sierra and quickly looked away. It seems that he is still upset about the fact that he took away Mawson Manor and almost strangled her to death. The rain outside the car window got heavier and heavier, and in the end it was almost impossible to see the road outside clearly. The flower show happens to be in the mountains. It is famous for showing their beauty in the most primitive ecological environment. Many cars had arrived. Anaxi opened the door and got out of the car holding an umbrella, and walked forward without saying a word. As soon as Sierra's hind legs came off, she heard a cry from her, and then looked over and saw her throwing herself into Eric's arms. Meeting him here was unexpected. Sella, Callida stood far away under a building sheltering from the rain and waved to her. The beautiful mermaid with an upright posture had already come down first, walked straight past Eric, came to Sierra's side, and got under her umbrella. Down. Sierra withdrew her gaze from Eric, and was extremely surprised when Rox hugged her shoulders. "Are you coming to the flower show too?" Zachary was invited by Callida. "I know you are coming too." He took the umbrella from her hand and said dissatisfiedly, "Don't you even need a male companion to accompany you?" "This is because I am angry that I don't take him with me." She smiled and said, "How did I know you would be interested in flowers? If I had known, I would have called you." Logozide lowered his head and kissed the hair beside her ear. "I'm interested in you, and I'll like whatever you like." Eric watched the two people interacting intimately, and the fishy-smelling mermaid deliberately covered his view of Sierra with her body. The two of them walked past each other intimately, causing the blood to fade from his honey-colored face, and the pain in his heart started to feel like pulling again. Anaxi also tried to get Eric to help her, but he took a step back suddenly, turned around and left. If Lizzie hadn't caught her in time, she would have fallen into the mud unsightly today. Anaxi clenched her clothes tightly, and the rain soaked the hem of her skirt for a while. They didn't even need a greeting between them, they were so strange to each other. Without the restraints of her family, even the 3 male protagonists already knew each other's existence. Sierra did not hide from Rox's declaration of sovereignty, but Eric's eyes made her thorn in her back. She was actually surprised that he was here. When she met Khalida, she asked softly, and then she realized that Lizzie was originally responsible for the flower show held here, but the Count's daily style and reputation were so bad that the organizer was replaced by the wife of a high-ranking military official. She was a pregnant countess, so Eric and his soldiers also came to see the flower show to act as guardians of the lady. "Do you have any flowers for the exhibition?" Logosied asked, biting her ear. "I can't grow flowers, and I don't have the art of flower arrangement." She nudged him. "There are many people, please pay attention to your image. Then when you finish the activity, will you go home with me?" He would not give up until he achieved his goal. Okay, I'll have dinner with you, but for now let's watch the flower show and vote for Khalida's flowers. I think she's pretty ugly." Logosied's words directly touched Khalida's heart, and she gave him a straight look with her siren filter on him. "Your fish is so rude." Zachary stood beside her and squeezed the back of her hand, rarely retorting. When Sira saw the situation, she knew that Khalida's fish pond had been completed. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Sure. Author, Mei Guicheng. Chapter 194. Logosied glanced at Zachary, who evaded his eyes but still did not leave Khalida's side. He pulled his lower lip and didn't say anything. He probably felt the same way. Sira stepped in between the two of them to interrupt the discordant atmosphere. "I think Khalida's flowers are pretty." She pulled Logosied away from the two people and walked to other flowers to admire them. Anna 11 also had flowers at the exhibition, but due to the impact of the last factory incident, no one cared about her flowers no matter how beautiful they were. She stood there lonely. None of the friends she had made friends with before had a good look on her. Myra even gave her a look of contempt when she passed by. They gathered around Sira, talking and laughing with her. "Miss, do you need champagne?" Yolanda asked her with a smile, holding the tray. Anaxi glanced at the champagne glasses, her gloomy look faded away, and she smiled. "Does it taste good?" "Wine from a good vintage is of course delicious." Yolanda replied politely. "Then go get everyone a drink." The other person nodded and walked away holding the tray. While Sira was discussing with Rawside what to eat at night, the organizer of the flower show, the pregnant Baroness, personally came over and invited Rawside to play a song. Early in the morning, I heard Anna 11 talk about Mr. Lashid's superb piano skills. The piano over there was originally just a decoration. "Can Sir please play a piece of music for me?" Sira looked in the direction of Anaxi. She smiled innocently and just raised her glass to her. It seemed that she was just sincerely praising Luxid. However, Logosied didn't want to leave Sira and give the wolf an opportunity, but the girl next to him pinched his waist with her small hands and told him not to refute others' face. "I haven't heard you play the piano for several days, so go ahead." Facing those expectant and soft eyes, Logosied couldn't refuse. "Yeah." He walked to the piano and sat down, placing his fingertips on the keys. His playing skills were not inferior to those of famous musicians in the capital, which made people with artistic talents present marvel. "Would you like champagne?" "Miss." There were only 2 glasses of champagne left on Yolanda's tray, so she wandered around waiting for someone to get a glass before finally going around to Sira. These 2 glasses of wine were specially prepared for her. Sierra came all the way in the rain, and was stared at by Eric's piercing eyes for a long time. She was indeed a little thirsty, so she grabbed a glass. When her peripheral vision glanced at Yolanda's face, she turned around curiously and swung the wine glass in her hand. "I think you look familiar." Yolanda smiled at her and said politely, "I've only seen you in the newspaper." She quickly turned around and left, and Sira didn't pay attention. She pressed her lips against the rim of the glass and took a sip of wine. Anna 11, who was a long way away from her, saw that she had drank the wine, her eyes instantly lit up, and the grin on her lips became wider. Vampire venom is the only thing that cannot be distinguished from werewolves and mermaids. It is colorless and odorless when mixed in a wine glass, but it has the fastest effect. Sierra just took a sip of wine and felt unwell. She touched her throat, and the sudden burning pain burned all the way from her throat to her stomach, like a big hand violently rending her stomach. Wow! The wine glass in his hand fell to the ground and broke, and the sudden noise attracted everyone's attention. Eric was the closest to her and rushed over to catch the person before they fell. Sierra! With a horrified roar and shattered eyes, Sierra only had time to see these expressions before her whole body began to twitch in pain. Her brain went blank in pain, her fingers scratched her neck hard, and she screamed unbearably. Severe pain seemed to have invaded her internal organs, and her flesh and blood were crushed in pain. Pain. It hurts. Doctor, doctor. Is there a doctor here? Someone was shouting, and someone was running past and causing a gust of wind. Eric picked her up and swept the flowers on display off the stand as quickly as possible with one hand. The crackling vase shattered, and the culprit himself, unaware of it, just laid Sierra flat on it, supporting her head. Sella, look at me, Sierra, what did you eat? Her eyes were unfocused, and the feeling of suffocation on the verge of death blocked her nasal cavity and esophagus. The veins in her slender neck bulged, and her body twitched less. Logosiet immediately issued an expulsion order for everyone. His eyes showed a fierce look, glowing with the dark light of a beast. Get out of here. The charm skill infected everyone except Anaxi, who was immune. She stood there and stared for a long time, wishing she could just watch Sierra die in front of her eyes. However, due to the need to hide her identity, she could only slowly follow a group of people with dull eyes out of the flower show. Bug fixed, Sierra character pops up. This was the second time that Sierra saw these words very clearly in her blurry vision. It was indeed the system's fault again, it wanted her to be forced to eject. It probably means I can go home. She slowly stopped struggling and allowed the dark whirlpool to drag her into the abyss. Her collar was pulled open by Eric. Under the snow-white skin, the beating speed of her heart had already exceeded the normal beating range of humans. La sighed. Damn it, do something. Lucid came to Sierra, snatched her from Eric's hand, and put his soft lips to hers. His saliva is the best medicine in the world. Although Eric found the scene of him kissing Sierra extremely annoying, he just endured it and looked anxiously at the pale girl who gradually became motionless. The entanglement between the lips gave Sierra a little more space in her closed airway. Fresh oxygen was brought in, and her body's survival instinct prompted her to take a breath, causing her entire chest to swell. But this was not the end, as her veins seemed to be flowing with lava, and the burning pain caused her to start screaming like crazy again after getting oxygen. Just don't save her, she seems to have seen the way home. Logoside's saliva did not provide much relief to her. She could vaguely hear her heart making its last struggle. Her fingers were visibly raised and trembling, and her fingertips touched Logosied's face and gently pushed him away. Huh, no more. She was in pain, his saliva had no great effect on her, and both parties knew it. Eric snatched her away from Logosied's hands and said in a trembling voice, even your saliva won't work. Go find Russell. As long as the time is fast enough, maybe it's too late. He might know what to do. He outlived any of them. Even the greatest doctors in the world couldn't save her, only Rose Hill. Sierra was held in Eric's arms and rushed directly into the heavy rain. The rainwater passes through the fir trees that stretch between the mountain forests and falls from the branches and leaves. The wet and cold water slapped on Sierra's pale face, and her lips became bloodless. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Sure. Author, Mei Gui Cheng. Chapter 195. Eric tried his best to warm her with his body, but it was raining too much outside, which was a disaster for Luo Xied's tail. He couldn't let the water touch his legs, so he could only let Zachary drive the car and try his best to get there. Chase behind. By the time Eric took Syrah to the castle in Rose Hill, her breathing was already weak and inaudible. Aldine smelled their coming from a distance and was very wary at first, until he heard Syrah's unusually slow heartbeat and realized something was wrong. Before he could go in and call the owner, the castle door was pushed open by a pale hand. Rose Hill stood in front of Eric in the blink of an eye, holding Syrah's face in his hands. Sela. His eyes were scarlet, with only the center of the pupils glowing a little black, as if he had just finished eating. I don't know what she did or what she ate by mistake. It might be some kind of poison. Eric felt that her life was dying little by little, and his brown eyes looked at his nemesis with a hint of pleading. Rose Hill took Syrah and ducked into the bedroom on the second floor. He put her on the bed. The girl's collar had been torn and torn. Large areas of her skin were pale under the impact of the rain, and some blood vessel lines became clear. He leaned close to her and wiped off the wet clothes on his body. There was no trauma on the girl's fair and exposed body, and her skin was intact. He held her wrist bone and lifted it up. His nails lightly scratched the skin of her wrist, and bright red blood flowed out instantly. Eric, who rushed up immediately, smelled a special smell. He saw the terrifying anger on Rose Hill's face and immediately asked, "Do you know what's going on?" Syrah's blood has always been sweet, but now, a foul-smelling venom has filled her blood vessels and is infecting her at an extraordinary speed. Venom. Rose Hill turned her face sideways and said in a cold voice, "You didn't even look at her and let her eat the vampire's venom." His voice was sharp and harsh, and his fangs were exposed from his lips, and he was furious. "I never let a vampire get close to her. She had just one day today, and I swear I saw her drink a glass of champagne. Maybe just one sip." As soon as Eric finished speaking, he suddenly reacted and stared. That's when someone is trying to hurt her on purpose. He was so angry that he punched the wall. With a bang, a big hole was made in the wall, and a layer of ash fell on Luo Xied's shoulders. He pursed his lips and hurried into the house from the corridor. None of the three inhuman creatures thought that the scene where they would get together again would be when Syrah was dying. They have a tacit understanding and know the priorities of things. No one is jealous at this juncture because of some trivial matter. There were only two choices before Rose Hill: to inject her own blood to completely transform Syrah, or to suck out the venom from her body before it was too late. Syrah, who was extremely angry, began to scream in pain again. Rawside came to the bedside, and when she was about to bite her tongue, he leaned down and pressed his lips against hers. This scene made Rose Hill's expression extremely cold, but it was undeniable that the mermaid's saliva was very useful. It can very well suppress the venom in Syrah's body and bring her vitality. Death's scythe was already close to her neck, but because of Lockside, Syrah barely opened her eyes. Tears welled up in his eyes, and his vision was blurry. Only the system prompt that clearly showed the bug was particularly eye-catching. There seems to be a progress bar below, which goes up and down again and gets stuck. She blinked hard, trying to resist Rawside's intrusive lips and tongue, but her body had no extra strength. She only heard Rose Hill's suppressed angry voice saying next to her, "I must transform her and grant her eternal life, otherwise she won't survive." Eternal life? What a terrible word. No, no, no. Absolutely not. Don't want. Syrah was speechless, and the strong psychological cry amplified several decibels and hit Rose Hill's ears. "Sela, are you still angry with me at this time?" His face was sullen, and even his replying voice was about to freeze. "I do not want." Sierra still yelled to him with all her heart. "Don't you dare try turning me into a vampire. I will hate you. I will hate you forever." When Rosehill heard her words, he couldn't hide the strong anger in his eyes. With a push of his hand, he pushed the unsuspecting Rossett against the wall. He knelt down on one knee and shouted, "Rosehill! What are you doing?" The angry vampire turned over and pressed Syrah under him, and blurted out in a sharp voice, "So you would rather die than become a vampire? And you still hate me?" Eric, who wanted to get him off Sierra, immediately stopped. "She doesn't want to live," he couldn't believe it. Rosehill can communicate with Sarah's voice because he has the ability to read minds. After reacting, Luosyed and Eric understood the reason for his anger, and they had never been so envious of this useless ability as they were now. How enviable that he could communicate with Syrah, who was seriously ill. Syrah refused to let go. She had already found the way back, and there was absolutely no reason to give up halfway. "Use your kiss to save her." Rosehill became angry and turned her face to face Rockside and said fiercely. As soon as he finished speaking, he opened his mouth, exposed his fangs, and stabbed into her wrist. The severe pain made Syrah tremble violently. As if he understood what he was going to do, Luosyed held Syrah's face again and kissed her. The blood was continuously drained from the body, Syrah's body temperature dropped, and the vitality that continued to pass through her mouth gave her her last breath, but she did not let her life end in this torture. Eric, who didn't know what to do, finally sat on the end of the bed, pressing his hands on her cold legs, trying to bring her some warmth. He opened his lips and said sarcastically, "I never thought that we could be united, haha. The venom is extracted together with the blood, but since it enters through the mouth, it cannot be removed completely." After a while, Rosehill forcibly pulled his fangs away from Syrah's wrist. His stomach was filled with her blood, and his eyes were brighter than ever. The satisfied emotion quickly disappeared from his face. He wiped away the blood on his lips with his palm and wrapped the gauze that had been prepared around her slender wrist. He gasped and said in a hoarse voice, "I almost drained her blood. You must kiss her continuously to ensure that her heartbeat returns to a steady state." When he said this, he was almost going crazy with jealousy in his heart, but his reason prevailed, and he knew clearly that he should wait for the news of her resurrection at this time. Syrah refused to become a vampire, and he didn't want to be hated by her, so he finally took the risk of taking the second path. Hope it's useful. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Sure. Author, Mei Guicheng. Chapter 196. I don't know how long the darkness swept through me, until a ray of light burst out in front of my eyes. Syrah opened her eyes vaguely, and the light alternated between bright and dark. She found herself standing in the hospital, with a pale girl with blonde hair lying on the bed. It had been so long that she felt unfamiliar with her appearance. She took a step forward, trying to touch the familiar yet sick face. The noisy voice entered as the doctor opened the door, and the missing memories filled her mind immediately. It turns out that when Sarah was looking for inspiration for writing on the coast of Whitby, she was not blinded by the sea breeze. She was washed into the sea by the big waves that washed up the cliff. She was not traveling alone. Her companions from the east immediately called for rescue. She was saved by luck. Unfortunately, he hit his head with a stone and was kept in the hospital until he was discharged. A friend paid her medical bills and brought a bouquet of bright red roses and a card. You can tell by looking at the bunch of freshly withered dry roses on the bedside that she often comes to see her. Sierra stretched out her hand to touch her, but her bright vision was suddenly eroded by darkness again, and the familiar burning sensation entered her body again. The calm chest began to pound, and Sierra clutched her chest. The severe pain began to tear at her soul, and the familiar suffocation feeling climbed up her throat. She staggered to the window of the hospital, her body easily penetrated the sun-filled glass window, and fell from a height. The boundless feeling of falling, the panic and heart palpitations that could not touch the ground, and the pain that penetrated her bone marrow surrounded her. "Call. The body that should have lost its breath enters oxygen, and the torn soul re-enters the fragile body. Newborn. The cold kiss left her lips. Sierra. A soft call. Sierra's closed eyelids trembled, and she slowly opened her eyes. In imagination, she should have returned to her own time. She blinked hard, everything seemed different from what she thought. Artistic line-carved ceilings, gorgeous bed curtains, and dark wallpapers. This hospital is nothing like the hospital I just saw. Sierra, Luxid's face appeared from the side and came into her sight, and his brown pupils shrank instantly. Thinking that she was scared by him, he immediately stepped away and said in a gentler voice, "Are you okay? How do you feel?" So. Lucide was still with her. She didn't go back. She was rescued. A strong sense of loss enveloped her heart. Sierra opened her mouth to ask herself where she was and why the style of painting looked so familiar. The bedroom door opened. "She's awake." Rose Hill appeared beside the bed, and her tense statue face relaxed for a moment when she saw her eyes open and still looking stable. He said, "Go and put the fireplace up, her body temperature is too low." Sierra was a little confused. "Why can I see these two people at the same time?" Dong dong dong. There was a muffled sound of running in the corridor, and then Eric rushed into the bedroom, squeezed in beside Rose Hill, threw himself on the bedside and held her face. "Sierra, thank God you're awake." His eyes were red, his handsome and resolute face came closer, and a warm kiss fell on Sierra's forehead. "You're back," he breathed heavily in relief. She froze. The scene she saw in front of her now had a greater impact on her than her failure to go back successfully. Who can tell her why this kind of scene that can make people die on the spot can happen again? Sierra's teeth chattered for a moment and she closed her eyes again. Out of sight is pure, out of sight is pure. She had to take a good moment to recover from the shock, and then think about how severe the secondary impact the scene had brought to her life. Sierra is shivering. "Is it that cold?" Eric asked worriedly. It was midsummer for Wally, and there was a fireplace burning in the bedroom, and her body temperature was extremely low. Seeing her lips turn white and her brows furrowed, Rose Hill said reluctantly, "Affected by the venom, her body temperature will whisper to ordinary people for a long time." As soon as his body came close to her, it was like throwing a piece of ice at her. The only one who could be of any use at this time was Eric. Eric reacted immediately, took off his black vest, and unbuttoned his pants. "I'll warm her up. This is the fastest way." When Luosied saw that he wanted to unbutton his trousers, Rose Hill stopped him angrily without Rose Hill objecting, "Don't you dare take your trousers off." His voice was full of temptation, and it was a terrible noise to Eric's ears. He rubbed his ears in discomfort. "Take it off to warm her up." Rose Hill glanced at Sierra, who was acting as a puppet with her eyes closed, and said coldly, "She hates it when you take off your pants. Put away your dirty thoughts." Skin to skin? He can't help but take off the wolf skin that misses him. His warning was full of murderous rage. Eric was not threatened, but Sierra's heart said she hated him, so he buckled the belt again, took off only his shoes, lifted the quilt, and got in. Fortunately, when she was unconscious, he went to wash his body and put on a clean set of clothes, so that she wouldn't be disgusted again. Before Sierra opened her eyes, a warm body crowded around her. Her whole body was pressed against Eric's strong chest. The venom did make her extremely cold, and as soon as it warmed up, she quietly exhaled. "Has the matter been found out?" Luosied forced himself to turn his gaze to look at Rose Hill. Seeing that the other person's face didn't look much better, he felt a little better. "The person is in the basement," he said coldly, "a servant who resigned from Mawson Manor. How could she have vampire venom? Obviously someone gave it to her in order to hurt Sierra." Eric hugged the lost girl tighter without warning. "Luosied, what did you ask?" "I can't read anything useful," Rose Hill said coldly, I chopped off her hands and refused to reveal the mastermind behind it. Maybe gouging out an eye would be more effective. Sierra was frightened when she heard this, and due to the presence of a vampire who could read minds, she didn't dare to bring Anna 11's name into the mix. Aldine brought the cooked hot soup into the bedroom. Sierra is awake, would you like some hot soup? Although her eyes were closed, everyone present knew that she was awake at the moment. Being in a bedroom in such harmony with a group of inhuman creatures, with 4 pairs of eyes staring at her, she couldn't bear it even with her eyes closed. Sierra, who felt uncomfortable all over, had to open her eyes. She pressed one side of her face against Eric's chest and nodded slowly. Want. She tried to pronounce it, but the broken tone sounded like a witch talking, startling herself, and she immediately shut her mouth. What happened? Her eyes widened in horror. Lucid immediately explained, the champagne you drank at the flower show contained vampire venom. It burned your throat and you won't be able to recover for a while. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Sure. Author, Mei Guicheng. Chapter 197. In other words, she couldn't speak for a long time. It's okay not to be able to speak. There is no need to answer the questions of 3 people, it is time to avoid danger. Sierra actually felt a little more relaxed. She looked at Aldine who was holding up the plate, and now the bowl of hot soup became her desire. Seeing that she wanted to eat, Luosied picked up the bowl first. Eric wanted to take the bowl and feed her himself, but it was inconvenient for him to hold the back of Sierra's neck with one arm, so he had to give up. Luosied picked up the spoon and blew on it, then handed the tomato puree to her mouth. Be careful not to burn it. Sierra opened her mouth, and a mouthful of thick soup immediately made her stomach, which was still cramping, feel better. She cautiously glanced at Rose Hill standing next to her, who stared at her with a cold face and said nothing. He was not the kind of man who would compete for favors. He did not get angry, but Sierra knew that he was on the verge of breaking out. Why are you the only one who really loves your little vest? It all fell off in front of him. Within a few minutes, Rose Hill, who couldn't stand it anymore, turned around and left the bedroom, with a strong cold air on his body. But he was still angry. What was there to be angry about? Sierra swallowed the soup and pinched the hem of her clothes with her hands hidden in the quilt. She still wanted to be angry, but she was obviously only one step away from her body. She had already seen the glimmer of hope, and everyone was pulled back. How frustrated she was. But then again, how could she still be saved? She knew she had eaten vampire venom. I vaguely remember that Luosied's saliva did not have any effect on the venom. What happened next? What did Rosehill do? Did he turn her into a vampire? After a series of mental activities, Sierra raised her hands with no strength and began to touch her neck. Eric saw this and asked, "What's wrong?" Sierra touched her neck. The skin was smooth and tender. Although her body temperature was very low, she could feel a trace of warmth and the frequency of her heart beating. So she was still alive and drinking tomato puree. Vampires don't like tomato soup. Realizing that she was still human, her tense back relaxed and she fell back into Eric's arms. All of her mental activities were displayed on her face, and Luosied quickly guessed what she was nervous about. He put down the soup bowl, leaned over and kissed her on the lips. "Don't worry, I'm here and I won't let you turn into a cold walking zombie." This scene was extremely dazzling for Eric, and he pushed Luosied away with his hand. "She's already awake and you still take advantage of her? Get out, she needs to rest now." "She's mine," Luosied sneered. "Will I let you get along with her alone? She doesn't belong to you, she just needs your body temperature." Sierra silently shrank into the quilt, her heart was trembling, hoping that the topic would not be brought to her. She hasn't made a choice yet, Eric said harshly, feeling very sad and forcefully holding the girl in his arms to declare his sovereignty. She will only choose me, Luocied stimulated him. We have done a lot of intimate things, do you want me to share them with you? No, don't say it. You both had very intimate encounters with me. Ah. Syrah exposed her face outside, opened her mouth, and let out a string of hoarse notes, finally letting the two of them understand that she was tired and wanted to sleep. The smoke of war that had just filled the air quickly dissipated, and Luocied couldn't bear to disturb her. Don't do anything. I'll be back soon. He stood up, took the tray, gave Eric a final warning, and walked out of the bedroom. There were only two of them left on the big bed. Eric lowered his head and whispered, "Are the intimate things you have done the same as mine?" Sierra looked up at him and shook her head decisively. No, he lied. Her eyes were full of innocence, and her brown eyes were clear and moist. Eric quickly relented, and he also lay down, half of his body pressed against her. After a while, seeing that she was still asleep, he said softly, "I believe in you so much. I have always believed in you. Even though I know that you are very carefree and there are so many close people around you, I still can't bear to give up on you." Sierra didn't know what to say, and losing her voice perfectly solved her problem. Eric stared at her with a look that was close to plaintive. "Why are you unwilling to defend yourself even once and would rather push me away? You obviously don't hate me." The love she expressed couldn't deceive anyone, the feelings were sincere. Sierra pressed her hands on his chest muscles, drew a few circles, and then wrote a sorry. Stroke by stroke, it was as if it was written on the tip of his heart. His warm palms stroked the top of her hair over and over again, and Eric whispered, "When you were about to die, my heart almost died too. At that time, I was helpless. When you were saved." His voice suddenly paused, and he said bitterly, "For a long time, I'm actually glad that they spent everything they had to send you back." Seeing her tortured by the venom, feeling like she was about to be torn apart, he was also in pain. His voice became softer and softer, "Stop torturing me." Sierra withdrew her hands that were groping at his chest muscles, lowered her head angrily, and buried her face in the quilt. "There is a good solution. No one needs to torture anyone anymore, and everyone can have a happy ending." She refused to be rescued or become a vampire and live forever, but they forced her back. Apart from continuing to torture each other until the next opportunity arises, she can't think of any good way. I can only blame Anna 11's strategy and system for being too weak, and the male protagonists being too powerful, so they just didn't kill her. Sierra hugged Eric back, trying to comfort his heart that was almost broken after the blow. The move worked, and she heard Eric let out a sigh of contentment. The warm quilt and fireplace quickly put the sick Sierra into sleep. Half asleep and half awake, she heard a magnetic and steady voice whispering in her ear, "I will never leave you." Sierra had another nightmare. In the dream, the ferocious werewolf turned into a majestic high-ranking officer of the kingdom. He was cold-blooded and iron-faced, won countless colonial wars, and locked her in a small dark room. Then everything happened. Her feet were imprisoned in a dark basement with iron chains, and a vampire with fangs came to feast on her every night. The painting style changed again and turned into a vast ocean. A group of mermaids surrounded the leader in Estrus, hoping that he could complete the task of mating with her under the witness of several pairs of eyes. Horrible, terrible. Sierra came out of her dream rolling and crawling, her dishonest body almost rolled out of bed. A cold hand held her body in time and tucked her back into the quilt. When she opened her eyes in fright, what came into view was Rose Hill's pale face. There was a strong smell of blood on him. Lo! She subconsciously opened her mouth to call him, but unexpectedly it turned into an unpleasant witch scream. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Shire. Author, Mei Guicheng. Chapter 198. Shut up. He sat down on the edge of the bed and put the quilt back on her with a stinking face. Eric beside her didn't know when she left, and she quickly felt a chill. Realizing her thoughts, Rosehill covered her with another blanket that had slipped down, and said in a cold voice, "He went hunting with that fish." Syrah pursed her dry lips and nodded. "So?" He squeaked slightly, and the curve of the corners of his lips raised was extremely ominous. "You did step on 2 more boats behind my back." "Sierra, dot. I can't speak." "You can speak." Rosehill looked coldly and glanced at her chest. "I can hear you clearly." "Sierra, dot. Help. Help." Rosehill's hand pressed on her waist through the quilt, and her handsome face kept magnifying in front of her eyes, full of danger. "You just want to tell me this." She lay on the bed with no way out, her little hands holding the sheets and shivering. I don't have my feet in 2 boats, I just had a friendly interaction with everyone." "Ha, the friendly exchanges are so deep? Kiss. Hug. What else did you do?" The tip of his nose was almost touching her face, and he breathed out cold air. "No more, no more, no more. I was forced to have no choice." Sierra waved the little white flag wildly in her heart, and her eyes were almost filled with tears. She didn't know if being strangled to death by Rosehill had the same effect as being killed by Anna 11. These words did not reach Rosehill's ears. His ability to read her mind was always good and bad, and he was always prone to slipping up at critical moments. Seeing that she was afraid, he controlled his anger and asked her in a low voice, "What else is he hiding from me?" Sierra shook her head. "No." Sierra nodded. "Really no more, nothing excessive." Rosehill reached out with his long arms, put his arm around her waist, lifted her up and leaned against the bed, letting go of the topic for the time being. "Yolanda, the servant who was with Josie, do you remember?" Syrah thought about it carefully and nodded. "She helped Josie frame me and was later fired by her father. I asked her why she looked so familiar on the day of the flower show and I didn't recognize her at the time. She was the last person to hand you the champagne, and that glass of wine was indeed laced with vampire venom." Rosehill stared at her, his voice low and cold. "What puzzles me is that I removed her limbs and gouged out her eyes, but she didn't reveal who the mastermind was, and she didn't even reveal her true feelings. There are a few people who can withstand torture and still seal their mouths and hearts and say nothing. For a vampire who could read minds, this human's endurance and brains were surprising." Rosehill asked again, "Do you think she can complete all this precise plan by herself?" Syrah shook her head honestly. "Is this related to your stepmother and sisters?" he continued to ask, and then answered his own question. "They were tricked by you, their property was taken away by you, they were resentful of you, and they came to murder you if they had hatred. Very reasonable." Sierra nodded. "It's quite reasonable, but there's no 100% guarantee that they are the masterminds behind it. Just like vampire venom, how can they get it? A vampire must have seduced them. But why would you seduce them to harm me?" She threw the question back to him. Rosehill's face sank, and he had already made up his mind. "There is a traitor in my pack who breaks the rules. Taking the initiative to give vampire venom to a human is tantamount to announcing your identity to the other person, which is absolutely not allowed." Seeing the serious look on his face, Syrah loosened her grip on the sheets and held his fingers instead. "With Rosehill's character, it is really possible for him to kill all the relevant personnel, which is absolutely unacceptable." She said in her heart, "No matter what, don't hurt my family. They are accomplices, and you still want to protect them." He stared at her, his cold face like a sculpture. Sierra nodded vigorously. "Your kindness has already killed you once, and you are so stupid to want to do it a second time." Rosehill snorted coldly, pulled away, and threw the door with a loud bang. The girl lying on the bed looked up at the ceiling and sighed. But this is the effect she wants. If it weren't for the fact that Anna 11 had a system that could allow her to go home, she would have approved of him killing people with both hands and feet. But then again, if the heroine is really killed by the hero and the world collapses, will she, the number one supporting role, be forcibly ejected? I had never thought about this before, I just wanted to survive, but it was different now. Cira lowered her eyes and thought, this road seemed worth trying if she had to. After a while, Rose Hill, who walked out, came back with food. He was irritated, but returned to feed her. Noodles and bread with a little mushroom sauce and marinated pork inside. He waved his knife, took out the big piece of bacon and cut it into small pieces in front of her eyes. You will stay here for the next month. Cira didn't object, she really needed to rest. Get those two things out. Rose Hill stared at her. Before I get completely angry, I think you can solve this matter perfectly, right? It's a little difficult, you know, they're not easy people to get rid of. Really, then which one of us do you like? Rose Hill held the knife and started cutting the bread again, the knife surface glowing coldly under the light. Cira swallowed silently and pursed her lips. I like you and want to marry you. The word marriage came from her mouth more than once. Rose Hill softened her expression and handed her the sliced bread and meat. Marrying me is so important to you. Then why give up eternal life? Probably thinking of some bad memories at that time, he started baring his teeth like a wild animal. You're still threatening me for this. I really can't believe how brave you are. Cira ate the bread and meat silently, replying to him in her heart. Unprepared for the never-ending darkness, the untouchable sunshine, I was afraid of this, beyond life. To live in darkness forever, with blood as a companion, Cira couldn't help but think about it. This reason is very reasonable. Losing sunlight and sucking blood is just a small blemish on the road to eternal life for Rose Hill. He enjoys blood, darkness, and rights, but none of this can be forced on Cira. She is too young. He is only 18 years old, a naive 18-year-old, no different from a mentally retarded child. As a child, he will make mistakes, and he always needs someone to tolerate him. His expression softened and became patient. I reluctantly agree, but I can't live with a wolf and a fish under the same roof. Do you understand what to do? The topic came back again, but it was impossible for Roxette and Eric to not see her for a month. She thought of a compromise. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Sure. Author, Mei Guicheng. Chapter 199. You can't split people into 3 parts, you can only let them visit you at a fixed time. Given a fixed visiting time in prison, Rose Hill was not afraid to veto it and reluctantly agreed. He agreed, but for Eric and Luxette who returned from hunting, it was another piece of unacceptable bad news. Sierra knew that they were all worried about their safety, so she used a piece of writing paper to communicate with them. Rose Hill won't do anything to me. I don't want the 3 of you to be uncomfortable with each other in the same space. How about staggering the time? Loosiet's delicate brows, which had always been gentle, were now filled with coldness. It's the same as living with me. I can allow them to visit you. Eric waited up and said, I'm going to the military camp during the day, but I'll definitely come at night until you fall asleep safely. The generosity he showed was unexpected, but it was also normal based on practical considerations. Loosiet's desire to control Cira was always the most prominent. He kept a cold face until the last bit of warmth disappeared. He held her hand holding the pen and said, I will give you the best treatment, the most comfortable bed and food, which is better than this tomb. Sierra shook her head slightly and wrote back, I want to be alone and not have people around me all day long. Okay. Loosiet looked at that line of words, and a hint of darkness flashed in his eyes. Don't you like me the most? Then come home with me. The mermaid's uniquely charming voice instantly made the girl's vision go blank. When Eric saw this, he immediately stopped him. No foul, You don't know she is seriously ill now? You rashly moved her body to the town and let her get bumped. Who knows what accident might happen? They all knew how fragile she was, otherwise they wouldn't have stayed with her to take care of her for several days. Loosied immediately stopped talking, his charm towards her dissipated, and his lake blue eyes were filled with deep reluctance. All right. He resisted the urge to take the person away on the spot, and reluctantly said, I will come to see you regularly, but you have to promise me one thing. Sira came back to her senses and blinked away her confusion. What's up? She wrote on the paper with a pen again. Don't let them kiss you. As soon as she finished speaking, Loosied pressed his palm on the back of her neck and kissed the sickly lips impatiently and eagerly in front of Eric. Caught off guard, the pen drew a long mark on the letter paper, then slipped out of the owner's hand and rolled to the floor. Sira didn't have the extra energy to resist the impulse. He faced Eric, and her loose teeth were easily pried open. Lucid held her waist and supported her head, attacking the city step by step. A seriously ill girl and an evil siren kiss passionately. This picture is so corrupt and ambiguous, it is so dazzling in Eric's eyes. His jealousy reached its peak in an instant, his resolute face was distorted, and he lost his mind. As soon as Sira heard a very familiar cracking sound beside her, her eyes were dazzled. Roxid, who was nibbling between her lips and teeth, was suddenly thrown to the ground by a huge and powerful wolf. The furry wolf body almost occupied the entire aisle beside the bed, pressing Luxide firmly under its paws. Roar! The beast's mouth full of fangs roared at the mermaid beneath him, full of anger and threats. Roxide was not to be outdone. Not in the ocean, his strength was also different from ordinary people. Seeing that he was about to throw out his fist and the two inhuman creatures were about to fight in the bedroom, Sira lifted the quilt and jumped down to stop them. Although she had thought about them having a fight more than once to determine the outcome, when the matter came to light, she felt not only sad but also guilty. A noise upstairs caught Rosehill's attention. He ducked into the bedroom, quickly picked up the girl who was about to fall off the bed, hugged her in his arms, turned around and walked out. Sierra, They are fighting. Let me go quickly. The vampire with a face like an ice sculpture gave her a cold look. What's there to see? I'll naturally come to you after the fight. According to his idea, it would be best if one party dies, and he comes from behind to deal with the rest. Sierra craned her neck to look toward the bedroom, and finally buried her face in his chest in frustration. At least don't put their lives in danger, they are all my friends. Friend. Rosehill's eyes fell on her red and swollen lips, her scarlet eyes were dark and sneer. You'd better take back these self-deceptive words. Sierra winced. The sound of drying above made the chandelier in the living room downstairs sway. Aldine was thinking about the new furniture list he would buy tomorrow. The bathroom in the guest room was violently kicked open by Rosehill. He put the delicate and frail girl down, hooked his hand around her waist to prevent her from falling, and ordered in a cold voice. Brush teeth. Sierra saw herself in the mirror, with a pale complexion, messy brown hair, and red bloodshot eyes. She looked like a witch herself. So ugly. It was the first time she saw herself so ugly. Rosehill, who heard her voice, slightly curved his lips, and deliberately pressed his eyebrows to urge her, hurry up. Sira obediently brushed her teeth and washed her face, and combed her messy hair smoothly. A lot of hair fell on the ground, even on the chest of the vampire behind her. She looked a little distressed. Sure enough, it is easy to lose hair when you are physically and mentally exhausted. She patted the arm around her belly to signal that he was okay. She urged in her heart again, let's go see Eric and Loseed, don't let anything happen. They will be fine if the bedroom collapses. Rosehill decided directly, turned her over and carried her to the sink to sit down. This scene seemed a bit familiar in Sira's memory. It was a thunderstorm day when Anasi's family came to visit him, and her hands and lips were still torn. I almost got eaten by him at that time. Thinking of this, she subconsciously licked her lips and was about to tighten her mouth when pale, cold fingers pressed against her jaw, forcing her to open her mouth slightly, revealing her white teeth. Let me check. Rosehill lowered his eyes, and his long eyelashes could not cover the coldness and secret anger in his eyes. He had been kissed countless times and endured it for an unknown amount of time. His emotions were also on the edge. Sierra wanted to shut up, but a cold finger was inserted into her lips. The fingertips rubbed her teeth, as if she was really checking whether her teeth were brushed clean. For some reason, the hair on her back stood up, and she felt bad. The vampire in front of him was tall enough to wrap her up when he leaned down. He tilted his head and moved closer to her lips, as if confirming something, his eyes focused. After a while, Sierra heard Rosehill praising himself, "Yes, it's cleaned." She could think of what he wanted to do next. Sierra took the initiative to wrap her arms around his neck, found the bright red lips and moved closer, but her movement was a bit off, and she only bit the man's cold lower lip. It tasted like eating ice jelly, which made her smart. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Sure. Author, Mei Guicheng. Chapter 200. You can't split people into 3 parts, you can only let them visit you at a fixed time. Given a fixed visiting time in prison, Rosehill was not afraid to veto it and reluctantly agreed. He agreed, but for Eric and Luxid who returned from hunting, it was another piece of unacceptable bad news. Sierra knew that they were all worried about their safety, so she used a piece of writing paper to communicate with them. Rosehill won't do anything to me. I don't want the 3 of you to be uncomfortable with each other in the same space. How about staggering the time? Luoxiet's delicate brows, which had always been gentle, were now filled with coldness. It's the same as living with me. I can allow them to visit you. Eric waited up and said, I'm going to the military camp during the day, but I'll definitely come at night until you fall asleep safely. The generosity he showed was unexpected, but it was also normal based on practical considerations. Luoxiet's desire to control Sierra was always the most prominent. He kept a cold face until the last bit of warmth disappeared. He held her hand holding the pen and said, I will give you the best treatment, the most comfortable bed and food, which is better than this tomb. Sierra shook her head slightly and wrote back, I want to be alone and not have people around me all day long, okay. Luoxiet looked at that line of words, and a hint of darkness flashed in his eyes. Don't you like me the most? Then come home with me. The mermaid's uniquely charming voice instantly made the girl's vision go blank. When Eric saw this, he immediately stopped him. No foul, you don't know she is seriously ill now. You rashly moved her body to the town and let her get bumped. Who knows what accident might happen? They all knew how fragile she was, otherwise they wouldn't have stayed with her to take care of her for several days. Luoxiet immediately stopped talking, his charm towards her dissipated, and his lake blue eyes were filled with deep reluctance. All right. He resisted the urge to take the person away on the spot, and reluctantly said, I will come to see you regularly, but you have to promise me one thing. Sierra came back to her senses and blinked away her confusion. What's up? She wrote on the paper with a pen again. Don't let them kiss you. As soon as she finished speaking, Luoxiet pressed his palm on the back of her neck and kissed the sickly lips impatiently and eagerly in front of Eric. Caught off guard, the pen drew a long mark on the letter paper, then slipped out of the owner's hand and rolled to the floor. Sierra didn't have the extra energy to resist the impulse. He faced Eric, and her loose teeth were easily pried open. Lucid held her waist and supported her head, attacking the city step by step. A seriously ill girl and an evil siren kiss passionately. This picture is so corrupt and ambiguous, it is so dazzling in Eric's eyes. His jealousy reached its peak in an instant, his resolute face was distorted, and he lost his mind. As soon as Sira heard a very familiar cracking sound beside her, her eyes were dazzled. Roxid, who was nibbling between her lips and teeth, was suddenly thrown to the ground by a huge and powerful wolf. The furry wolf body almost occupied the entire aisle beside the bed, pressing Luxide firmly under its paws. Roar! The beast's mouth full of fangs roared at the mermaid beneath him, full of anger and threats. Roxide was not to be outdone. Not in the ocean, his strength was also different from ordinary people. Seeing that he was about to throw out his fist and the two inhuman creatures were about to fight in the bedroom, Sira lifted the quilt and jumped down to stop them. Although she had thought about them having a fight more than once to determine the outcome, when the matter came to light, she felt not only sad but also guilty. A noise upstairs caught Rosehill's attention. He ducked into the bedroom, quickly picked up the girl who was about to fall off the bed, hugged her in his arms, turned around and walked out. Sierra, They are fighting. Let me go quickly. The vampire with a face like an ice sculpture gave her a cold look. What's there to see? I'll naturally come to you after the fight. According to his idea, it would be best if one party dies, and he comes from behind to deal with the rest. Sierra craned her neck to look toward the bedroom, and finally buried her face in his chest in frustration. At least don't put their lives in danger, they are all my friends. Friend. Rosehill's eyes fell on her red and swollen lips, her scarlet eyes were dark and sneer. You'd better take back these self-deceptive words. Sierra winced. The sound of drying above made the chandelier in the living room downstairs sway. Aldine was thinking about the new furniture list he would buy tomorrow. The bathroom in the guest room was violently kicked open by Rosehill. He put the delicate and frail girl down, hooked his hand around her waist to prevent her from falling, and ordered in a cold voice. Brush teeth. Sierra saw herself in the mirror, with a pale complexion, messy brown hair, and red bloodshot eyes. She looked like a witch herself. So ugly. It was the first time she saw herself so ugly. Rosehill, who heard her voice, slightly curved his lips, and deliberately pressed his eyebrows to urge her, hurry up. Sierra obediently brushed her teeth and washed her face, and combed her messy hair smoothly. A lot of hair fell on the ground, even on the chest of the vampire behind her. She looked a little distressed. Sure enough, it is easy to lose hair when you are physically and mentally exhausted. She patted the arm around her belly to signal that he was okay. She urged in her heart again, let's go see Eric and Loseed, don't let anything happen. They will be fine if the bedroom collapses. Rosehill decided directly, turned her over and carried her to the sink to sit down. This scene seemed a bit familiar in Sierra's memory. It was a thunderstorm day when Anasi's family came to visit him, and her hands and lips were still torn. I almost got eaten by him at that time. Thinking of this, she subconsciously tightened her mouth, and pale, cold fingers pressed against her jaw, forcing her to open her mouth slightly, exposing her white teeth. Let me check. Rosehill lowered his eyes, and his long eyelashes could not cover the coldness and secret anger in his eyes. He had been kissed countless times and endured it for an unknown amount of time. His emotions were also on the edge. Sierra wanted to shut up, but Rosehill's cold fingertips rubbed her lips, as if he was really checking whether her teeth were brushed clean. For some reason, the hair on her back stood up, and she felt bad. The vampire in front of him was tall enough to wrap her up when he leaned down. He tilted his head and moved closer to her lips, as if confirming something, his eyes focused. After a while, Sierra heard Rosehill praising himself, yes, it's cleaned. She could think of what he wanted to do next. Sierra took the initiative to wrap her arms around his neck, found the bright red lips and moved closer, but her movement was a bit off, and she only bit the man's cold lower lip. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Sure. Author, Mei Goicheng. Chapter 201. The horrific memory of almost being killed by vampire venom was still vivid in her mind, and she was a little frightened. But unexpectedly and seemingly within reason, Rose Hill's movements were very gentle, occupying her territory inch by inch, eating at her sanity, and driving away the extremely unpleasant aura of him. Kissing all the time has taught Sierra how to breathe through her nose. She hummed softly, holding onto the edge of the cold sink with her soft fingers. She swayed her thin straight calves. When she heard there was no movement on the ceiling, she kicked his legs. "I'm tired." With a cry of grievance in his heart, the vampire with half-squinted eyes and scorching eyes stopped his movements. He rubbed his lips gently for a while before straightening up. "I can let go of your nominal family." Rose Hill licked her lower lip, raising her beautiful chin slightly with arrogance, "but I won't make it easy for them. This is my biggest concession." As long as they could be spared, Sierra didn't care and nodded obediently. He held her in his arms again, walked slowly to the bed in the guest room, and tucked her into the quilt. Recently, several colonies in St. Laurent have launched counterattacks and officially declared war on Larini. She suddenly opened her eyes in disbelief. Why so suddenly? There was no warning at all. "It hasn't been published in the newspaper yet," Rose Hill said casually. "It will happen sooner or later." Of course, Sierra knew that it would be a matter of time. She had known that this day would come from the time the king tried to sell drugs. It's just that the war came suddenly and the people didn't know anything about it. Her 2 laundry factories still had to feed so many workers. "Can you ask Aldine to bring a letter to Khalida?" She tugged at his shirt sleeves, her pale lips pursed in worry. "I'll get you a pen and paper." Sierra wanted to remind Khalida that if there was a war, she could take the earliest boat out of Lilani and take the money she had in the bank with her. But Zachary will definitely follow Loseed. If Khalida wants this fish, there is a high probability that the spark of love will be sparked. Will he still leave? Sierra thought for a moment and focused on the problem of material storage when she started writing. Her laundry factory was full of black slaves. During the war, there would be no Lilani people to give them some food. On the contrary, they would kill them. Got them. She had to ask Khalida to help prepare food and some self-defense supplies. After writing a few pages eloquently, the physical fatigue that had not yet recovered came over again and again. Sierra endured the fatigue and packed the letter paper. In the darkness outside the door, Lucid and Eric walked in one after another after the fight. As Ross Hill said, nothing happened to these 2 people. They had changed into clean clothes and looked like human beings. "I'm going back tonight." Eric walked to her bed first, leaned over and kissed her forehead. "Good night with me, okay?" There were 2 pairs of eyes watching him next to him. Sierra touched his face, and then wrote heavily on a new piece of paper, "Don't fight, good night." The exclamation mark was drawn big and thick. The handsome boy imitated the mermaid and pretended to be obedient. He kissed her temple again with apology. "No, I was too impulsive just now." Sierra nodded with relief. Loosied, who was standing aside, soon understood what a bad feeling it was to watch someone else kiss his girl. Eric's ability to apply what he learned now almost made him unable to hold back. He suppressed his burning jealousy, kept his promise, and turned around to leave. After the castle returned to calm, Aldine, who had returned from delivering the letter, looked at a large missing wall in the master's bedroom and silently made a note in his notebook. "The cold wind from the mountains is howling in, and you can see the entire wilderness outside without opening the window." He still had to find some builders to repair the house, maybe they had collapsed the load-bearing pillars. Without 3 pairs of eyes watching over her, Sierra felt at ease when she fell asleep. Rose Hill put on her nightgown and lay down on the other side. He glanced at her sleeping face and whispered in a low voice, "Go and find a way to get Josie into the casino and find someone to pay a gambling fee and let her play get in. If you can't kill people, then you can only let him use other methods." Aldine at the door made another note in his notebook, thinking that he still had a lot of work to do tomorrow. King Horus called twice today, begging the master to come forward and have someone lend him some money. After living for so long, the key financial avenues of the royal family are all controlled by his people. Horus has always tried his best to win over him or murder him, all for money. Rosehill's handsome face was merciless, his fingers slid across Syrah's straight nose, and his thin lips raised a sharp arc. Tell everyone not to interfere, the glory will eventually belong to Sunderland. Josie's family hadn't seen Sierra for a long time. Every time they went to Mawson Manor, they were invited out by the servants on the pretext of being unfamiliar with her. Nowadays, it is extremely difficult to go back to my former home. Without a comfortable home and accustomed to squandering money, Lizzie, whose wallet has shrunk rapidly, is worried about making money every day. He had no means to find a new way to make a fortune. He can no longer get a foothold in any industrial development. The old ideas of the times have completely defeated him as a landlord. Living in this state of life every day, he finally came up with the idea of Anna 11. Marrying her to a wealthy businessman urgently was the fastest way to help his family rise. Realizing that her father had such thoughts, Anaxi, who originally kept silent about Syrah, could no longer bear it and reported her whereabouts using the location given by the system. Sela was in Rosehill's manor. During the flower show that day, she suddenly felt unwell for no apparent reason and was taken away. Lizzie, who had a vague memory, had no memory at all, but being able to know where Syrah was tantamount to giving him a little hope. Let's go see how Syrah suddenly lives with Mr. Rosehill. It's too shameful for two people to live together without fulfilling their marriage. Lizzie was in high spirits, while Anai was resisting, with a hint of panic in her eyes. I won't go. Why don't you go? You are her sister, you must. The words were interrupted. What sister? She and I didn't come from the same child. We only met when we were 18 years old. We are not familiar with each other. Anna 11 suddenly became hysterical. Her appearance made Lizzie confused and angry. Why are you so malicious towards her? Your sister is the only one who can restore our current situation. Dad had a quarrel with her because she didn't want to live in the manor. Now you want to save her again? Don't you have any dignity? As soon as Anaxi spoke, Lizzie, who was completely angry, gave her a backhand slap. Shut up. How dare you want to live here for the rest of your life? Living here can't give you a good marriage.